Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
How do you feel great on vacation? Like really good? Easy. You go to Aruba. You'll spend your time relaxing on cool white sand beaches and floating in healing blue water. You'll immerse yourself in natural wonder and find your center on an island where things move at your speed. You won't just feel great, you'll feel relaxed, renewed, and ready for life. That's the Aruba effect. Plan your trip at Aruba.com.
Hello and welcome back to Peak Northwest, an outdoors and travel podcast by the Oregonian and OregonLive, dedicated to the adventure and exploration of our beautiful Pacific Northwest. On this podcast, we take you to some of the most beautiful and interesting destinations in our region, discussing where to go, what to do, and places to see. I'm your host, Vickie Connor, and today we are traveling from Timberline Lodge to Seaside, Oregon for my first Hood to Coast relay race. And joining me on the podcast is engagement editor Julie Evensen, who has completed a number of Hood to Coast relays now. Julie, welcome on the pod.
Thanks for having me.
So loyal listeners might recall that Julie actually came on the pod roughly 2 years ago, maybe exactly 2 years ago, to talk about her Hood to Coast experience. And I was actually listening to that podcast episode in preparation for this year for running Hood to Coast. And Julie, I don't know if you remember what I was saying on this podcast, but I'm going to have to walk back a lot of my words because I was like, I pretty much word for word was like, I can run 1 mile and I don't know about anything else. This sounds crazy to me. And here I am now. I have completed Hood to Coast.
That's awesome.
So anywho, we covered a lot in that episode, just like a general overview about Hood to Coast. And I figured it would be kind of fun to go through, as a first timer experiencing Hood to Coast, talking to someone who has experienced Hood to Coast multiple times and kind of like compare and contrast experiences, talk about everything that you go through and kind of get into the fine details of everything that you experience when doing this race. So Julie, could you start by giving us kind of a general overview of what this race really is and what it involves?
Yeah, absolutely. It is probably the most famous of these types of running relays in the world. It was one of the first, if not the first. I think that gets debated online quite a bit of, whether this one was truly first, but it started 42 years ago when I was on the podcast last. It was the 40th anniversary running of Hood to Coast. And I think it started with just like a local running group. And they started to do this thing where, they would take turns running the, roughly 200 miles it takes to get from the top of Timberline out to Seaside on the Oregon coast. And people started to get really interested. Like, it's kind of spread by word of mouth, and more people started to do it. And now it's become kind of an Oregon institution. And it's something in the running world that is, it's kind of a bucket list thing for people. Most people I know who are serious about running have run it once, or it's on their wish list to run it once. People come from all over the world to run this. There are, professionals and elite runners who form teams. Countries will send representatives. So it's really become a fixture in that running community and in Oregon's identity. So if you ask people from outside the Pacific Northwest, they might not know as much about it. I think a lot of our audience probably knows some of the basics, or at least you've seen those vans driving through the Portland area. or, out to the coast in late August every year. But for those who don't know, Hood to Coast is a running relay. It's teams of 12 runners, 6 to kind of a sub team. You split up, and everybody runs legs of, roughly 4 to 7 miles. You take turns. There's a little slap bracelet that functions as your relay baton, and you pass it from runner to runner. And basically, over the course of a little less than 2 days, 12 people collectively run about 200 miles from Timberline to the beach at Seaside on the Oregon coast.
That is exactly it. And, I think it's funny. I was trying to explain what exactly this relay race was to my family and my friends back in Maryland who really have not heard of it. And, I just kept repeating, I am not myself running 200 miles by myself. I think by the end of it, I ran a total of 16 miles, and I ran 3 times. So ran 3 times, broken up into 7, 4, and 4 miles each. And you're getting to rest in between those times. So it's not all at once.
Right.
You get some time to sit, maybe get some shut-eye. And there are breaks in between. And you're surrounded, hopefully, by a great group of people in your car and on your team who are helping support you throughout the way as well.
And that, I think, is part of the attraction for people. It's running. People are serious about running, but it's also an event. You have a lot of fun with the people on your team. It's like a bonding event. Even for people who come in as alternates, that's actually how I got started running Hood to Coast. I was a runner. I have lots of friends who are runners. And I always said, if you ever need a backup, if you ever need an alternate, this is something that's on my running bucket list. I'd love to do it someday. And people have always known that I'll jump in at the last minute and do it. And that's how I got started doing it. So sometimes you're running with people that you haven't met before that week. And I've had a pretty amazing experience every time, whether I'm running with friends or with people who are total strangers until, spending 200 miles on the road with them.
You really get to know people very well during this time.
Yes.
Another way I've been describing this to people is almost like you're going to a multi-day music festival, but rather than music, it is running, because you're getting very little sleep. You're probably very stinky. You're sleeping in kind of random places, sometimes out in an open field. Maybe you're sleeping in the car, and there's chaos and a ton of fun involved. And yeah, that's almost the best way that I can describe it to people who have no idea what it is.
I think that's a pretty good description, because you do end up, camping in somebody's pasture near the coast range. And you sleep in places you wouldn't normally sleep. And there is usually a party atmosphere. People decorate their vans. Everybody's got a team name with a theme. Some people wear funny costumes. Some of the van decorations get really elaborate. I don't know if you saw anything particularly. I don't know if it was last year or the year before. I've done this so many times now, it all kind of starts to blend together. But there was a doctor's office who had created this giant functioning syringe and put it on the top of their van. And when they pushed the little plunger thing, water would come out. I think a music festival or a parade or Mardi Gras, those are all pretty apt comparisons.
Yes. Yeah. And for anyone listening who's trying to figure out what all of this is and why vans are involved, essentially you'll drop off one of your runners at what they call an exchange point, and then the van then drives to the next spot. So while your runner is out on the course, you're moving ahead so you can meet them at the next spot and exchange runners. And one of the crazy vans that I saw was, it must have been, this lawn care company that had maybe their employees participating, and they put on the top of these large vehicles fake grass and either a real or a fake lawnmower on top of the car. And yeah, it was pretty cool to see how elaborate people get with it. So for this year, for me, I joined as a single person joining onto a team that needed someone, an extra person, because someone had dropped out, life happened, whatever. And so I joined this year through knowing someone from one of my running groups. And I essentially was like, oh, this has been on my bucket list now, and I would love to do it. And then within the next week, they were like, oh, we actually need someone. Can you join on our team? And so this was one of those scenarios where I knew one other person, and the 10 other people on the team were total strangers, but I still had the best time, and they were all so kind. It was also an environment where there were a few pretty like intense runners, but I think most of the team, it was their first time doing Hood to Coast. So it was a brand new experience. We went into it without any real like expectations. And we all wanted to have a fun time rather than setting PRs or anything like that.
Yeah, I have some friends who run on competitive teams, and that's wonderful for them. I always congratulate them at the end that I am there to sightsee. I am there to socialize. Like, you know, I'll set a goal for myself and maybe set like a little mini PR, but for the most part, it's just fun. So
yeah.
One question I have for you. So we kind of mentioned at the top of the episode, I've done this this would have been, I think, my 6th time, but I got COVID and had to drop out at the last minute. And my team was one of the teams on one of those Facebook groups or on Reddit trying to find somebody. But we talked about this on the podcast 2 years ago, and you were kind of like, I would never do that. And I want to know why you decided to do it.
I think just about a year ago, or maybe closer to a year and a half, it was one of those like randomly really nice days outside in April when normally it's raining and gross in the Portland area. And I was like, I just had this sudden urge to go for a run. And I went like 2 miles in my neighborhood, and I was like, okay, that wasn't so bad. My knees aren't dead or killing me, or there's no pain. And somehow between that experience and today, I don't know. I think a spark happened on that day. And then I went and did a turkey trot on Thanksgiving. And I was like, oh, it's kind of fun to race and have a little bit of competitiveness. And now I've done, the Shamrock Run that happens in Portland every year. I did the Bend Half Marathon, and I am planning to do a half Ironman race now in September. So I really did a 180 on my view with running.
That's how it gets you, though. I ran in high school, but I was a sprinter. I did the 4x100 relay, and I did 100-meter hurdles. And I said for years that running more than a mile is crazy. Like, why would anybody do that? Like, you're running for speed, you're running for, and I would do my training runs. Like, I didn't ever want to run more than a mile. I might run 2 if I had to. And then as an adult, you don't have, sports, like organized sports, in quite the same way anymore. And a bunch of my friends were distance runners, and they made me sign up for my first half marathon. I think I went from like 100-meter sprints to half marathon, like with no stops in between. And it was horrible. And halfway through, I was like, I'll never do this again. And then like the second you cross that finish line, it's like, okay, when's the next one? I'm gonna keep training. I'm gonna sign up for this. And I think every runner's had that experience.
Yes. Exactly. And yeah, I grew up playing soccer, and so sprinting was, kind of baked into me as a soccer athlete. But yeah, it also was kind of a challenge to be like, can I run this distance? And like, how do I learn to actually pace myself? And then, it's kind of an ego check as well to be like, sometimes you have to run as slow as you can to make it that distance. And that's what works. So getting into a little bit more about the nuances of hood to coast, do you have any go-to tips that you've kind of collected throughout the years now, Julie, of like, okay, I must bring, this, and this, and what's your approach when packing and stuff?
I mean, I'm pretty typical. There are all of those spreadsheets that get, sent around through the running community, and somebody's friend who ran it made a spreadsheet, and it gets sent to you, or you can find them on message boards and stuff. And so I follow that pretty closely. Like, again, it's been 42 years. Like, people have this down to a pretty good science. They know what they need. And some of it, I think, depends on the vibes of your team. I've run on teams that are like a little bit more serious, and like, everybody follows the packing list, and it's very straight laced. It's not a party, but it's still fun. But it's a little bit more focused on the running. And then I've also run on teams where they brought a case of Budweiser and a clown mask. So but for me personally, I think the two things that I have found that are like critical supplies that, aren't for like a fun party. It's not disco lights or anything like that. I invested in one of those pop-up camping toilets that can also be used as a changing tent. And that is an absolute game changer. Nobody wants to change in a car, in the backseat of a car, if they don't have to. I've run on a couple of co-ed teams, and I think that having that also makes everybody feel like a little bit more comfortable, especially if it's like you're running with a team of people that you don't know super well. I've certainly done the quick change in the back of the van before, but having that kind of private space, even if it's only for like 5 minutes when you're trying to get changed really fast, I think makes the whole experience like just a little bit easier. And then the other thing that I always bring in the van with me is one of those roller sticks. I like the Tiger stick. I think there are other brands out there, but I think the thing that people, before they run hood to coast, don't quite have a concept of is you are running really hard for 5 or 6 miles. And then when you get done, you're going to sit in, depending on, what order you run in, you're going to sit in that van for another 5 or 6 hours while other people run, and then you drive to go pick them up. And your muscles can tighten up really badly in between there. You're probably going to run a little faster than you normally run because it's, race pace versus training pace. And so muscle soreness happens, and you'll get muscle knots and stiffness. And I ran on a team a few years ago, and one of my van mates had one of those rollers, and I was like, I will never run this again without one of these, and bought one for myself. And now I bring it every time.
Yep, those are great. I did bring one of those. Mine's kind of like one of the marshmallow stick ones that the things like roll on your leg. But my pro tip that I learned is that after I got in the car and we were going to the next exchange point, I was kind of like the volunteer. If it was an exchange point where we had some time, I'd be the volunteer that would walk the next runner up to meet the person coming in, and then walk that person back to the car, just so I could like move my legs a little bit. We also, rather than a van, we had ended up renting like a pretty large SUV that had, 3 rows of seats. And somehow, I have pretty long legs, but sometimes I would be all the way in the back, and my knees would be almost up to my forehead when I sat down. And I needed to walk a little bit after running that hard. But let's talk about the choosing your leg that you run, because that is a whole nother thing. And if you read the handbook for Hood to Coast, you'll learn that if you have a team of 12 people, you're running pretty evenly. Like, say I was leg 4 this year, and so leg 4 plus 12, so 16, and then 28. And those were the titles of each run that I was doing. So, Julie, you've done this a few times now. Do you have like a favorite leg that you've run, and what are kind of the differences between them all?
So they provide a list of all of the different legs ranked by both distance and difficulty. So if you're doing this for the first time, there is like a nice little diagram that gives you, like an at a glance view into, how hard is this? How many miles am I going to have to run? And, none of them are really like super off from each other. I think that the average is about 15 miles, but there definitely are some that are longer mileage than others. Some of them are hillier than others. Some of it is on gravel surface. So, if you prefer trail running, that might be something you like. If you don't like that, you might want to avoid those. I think my favorite leg is actually the leg that you ran this year. I like leg 4 a lot. Leg 3 in Van 1 is also pretty nice. I haven't done it enough times to have run all of them, although I have some friends who have. The team that I have consistently run with the past few years, they try to give everybody a chance to run a leg that they have not run before if they want to. I've never run leg 1, but I really want to. It's that really dramatic downhill coming out of the gate at Timberline. I'm one of those weird people who I like running hills, but I prefer running downhill. And it's just beautiful because it's sunrise. And so I've never run that one. I really want to. That's kind of on my bucket list to do. But yeah, I really like legs 3 and 4 in Van 1. I've run leg 12 before, which is the final anchor, the person who comes across the finish line at Seaside. That is also really fun. That's a challenging leg. That's another one that has a lot of downhill in it, but there's just like something really emotionally fun about being the one who runs across that finish, and your team waits for you at the finish line. And it's Hood to Coast is a well-oiled machine at this point. They have photographers come and take your picture, and everybody gets their medals, and there's the beach in the background and the ocean. And it's really well done. And it's just like a really fun feeling. The hardest leg there's some debate about this, but in my opinion is leg 5, which has that heartbreaker hill in the Coast Range near the end. I have no desire to run that one. If I ever get assigned that one, I'm going to have to train really hard. But it's something that, like, if you do it, you can say that you've done it. So when you were doing it this time, did you see anybody doing there's all these traditions that go along with that hill and making it up that hill. So what were your impressions as like a first timer seeing that?
So I heard about this hill, and also we had another person join on our team from the Facebook group who was a single person who this was her 11th time doing Hood to Coast, and every single year does a different leg. We were looking for the leg that she wanted to do. So she was kind of like our fairy godmother of the van, and would tell us, all these different traditions, or, the little secrets that are baked into Hood to Coast. And she mentioned this hill, and she was like, I've packed the toilet paper for this leg. And we were like, what are you talking about? And so, spoiler alert, if you don't want to hear about all these little secrets, skip ahead a few seconds. But essentially, once you make it to the top of this hill, which is not the finish line or exchange point of this leg, but you're done with the uphill of this leg, your team could potentially be there with a roll of toilet paper creating a little fake finish line just to celebrate the end of that elevation increase. And so that was something we did. And there were multiple other teams like pulled over on the side of the road setting this up. And we were just cheering for everyone running by, because you need that moral support after doing all of that.
So the team that I've run with the last few years, we do the toilet paper thing, but also we bring chalk markers, the stuff that washes off with the next rain. And we do this for several legs, but we tend to do it more for the more difficult legs. We'll drive ahead and stop at points along the way and use the chalk to write encouragement with our runner's name on it. So like, hey, you're almost there, Aaron, like this. And that's really nice. I had a pretty hard uphill leg with that team a couple years ago, and being like halfway up, it wasn't the leg 5 hill, but being like halfway up a pretty challenging hill, and then there's like your name in hot pink that's like, you've got this, like that helps.
Yeah.
And then when our runner gets to the top, we'll do the toilet paper thing, but we also bring bubbles. So it's like a little bubble party, and you break the tape, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, those were the great little parts of Hood to Coast that I was like, it makes sense that all these things are part of Hood to Coast because it's been around for so long, but it made me smile. It was so heartwarming, all the little things, like also keeping track of what people call as their road kills. Every time that you pass someone else, you're supposed to count it, and then you might write on like the windows of your car and in that washable paint, keeping track of like the number of road kills. And there were vans that, you know, had pretend roadkill, like stuffed animals attached to the front grille of their van. And then other little stuff like people just being so dedicated to their team theme and like printing out magnets, or ordering magnets and like tagging vans and cars. And so you get a collection of magnets at the end of your race. So all that little stuff, I just thought was so cute. One thing that we also just need to talk about real quick here is that because this race is going on for, you know, our team ended up finishing in 36 hours. There was a little hiccup where our van 2 was at the wrong exchange point at a major exchange. But all that being said, you're running for so long, you're bound to be running in the dark. And who knows, it could be in the middle of the night, whatever. So what have you learned throughout the years about running in the dark, Julie?
So I think there's 2 teams when it comes to running in the dark for Hood to Coast. There's Team Headlamp and Team Flashlight. I was Team Flashlight for a lot of years. I didn't like running with like something on my head. It really bothered me. But I finally invested in some really nice headlamps that were specifically for running. And I did actually run with a headlamp this last time that I was able to run Hood to Coast, which was last year. And that made a huge difference. Like it actually does like put the light better where you need it to be. But the flip side of that, you know, like that's the practical side. The flip side of that is the first year that I ran Hood to Coast, you know, you're supposed to wear a reflective vest and you put flashing lights on it so that, you know, you're visible, which I did. You know, you have to do that, and it's very functional and practical. But then as we're running, there were all of these people with these just like amazing light vests that were like, they looked really high tech and space age, and they're in all of these really interesting colors. And I was like, oh man, I want one of those. Like if I'm going to keep doing this, I want to get that. Like I want to have fun with this. Like I want to, because they have light settings where it can be like, you know, dance party. You can sync it to your music. I know this year they let people start wearing headphones again, but for most of the time that I've been running Hood to Coast, you couldn't use the headphones that went in your ear. You either had to use the bone conducting ones or like wear a little Bluetooth speaker on the outside. So that was fun. Like you'd wear your speaker and you'd wear your light up vest and, you know, kind of sync the pattern, the light pattern and the colors to your music. And the other thing that I discovered about those light up vests is that they're a lot lighter. They're designed to be very wearable. They have a tiny little battery pack. But they're very lightweight. They're easier to run in than those big reflective vests, and they look really cool. I bought one for myself. I found out that they make them for dogs. So I have 2 dogs. So I have dogs in light up vests now too.
My biggest thing was even with the headlamp on, like it shines a little bit too far out to, unless you're running really with your head down. I was nervous that there was going to be a random pothole. I was running along like Scappoose area, so there were cars whizzing by, and I was worried that I was gonna like step in something and just twist my ankle. But in the end, I just tried to keep those thoughts out of my head and just continue on running through the dark. The other thing with this being a 36-hour race, a lot of people were asking, like, do you sleep at all? Are you just getting like a little bit of shut-eye in the car? How does that work? What have you done in the past as far as sleeping goes?
I'll preface this by saying that I've done Hood to Coast enough times now that sleeping is not hard for me. I think like maybe the first time you do it, it can be like, it can feel a little weird. It can feel like, what am I doing? I'm sleeping in the middle of the day. This is strange. But once you get used to it, like your body kind of knows what's expected, and it's easier to adjust to. And I have to confess that either van, there's a point where you are kind of out toward the coast, in the Coast Range, that area. And there are these outdoor sleeping areas marked off. And every time it's like the best sleep I have all year. It's usually only a couple hours, but there's just something like, there's not a lot of light pollution, and you're coming in and you're really tired. And I have like a really nice sleeping bag, and it kind of smells like grass and hay, and it's just lovely. And it's great. It's like, it's always my best sleeping experience. So I'm sure there are other people who are like, that's really weird. But I love it. So in terms of like when you sleep, kind of leading up to that point, depending on which van you're in, when you get through the 6 runners in your van, you usually get a break. And we've done a bunch of different things throughout the years on the teams that I've been on. Like, depending on where people on your team live, you can stop at somebody's house and have a bite to eat, and, grab a couple hours of sleep before you have to get back up and, go meet your other set of runners. A couple years ago, somebody on our team had a family member who worked for a hotel. We were able to book a nice couple of hotel rooms. That was wonderful. We were van 1 that year. We were in downtown Portland, and like, we brought all of our like good food, and we had like a cute little like, adjoining corner rooms, and got to like make ourselves something to eat and take a nice hot shower. So, there's just a bunch of different ways to do it. I've also gotten really good at sleeping in the van. By the time it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, most people are ready to sleep in the van, whether you're a good car sleeper or not. But yeah, my favorite is just sleeping in a field in a sleeping bag. I don't know why it's such good sleep, but it's always amazing for me.
I had that exact same experience. I'm like, what are they sprinkling in this field that just puts everyone out? But you are just at this point of total and complete exhaustion that you're like, give me any flat surface, I'll lay there and I will conk out. Some people bring tents. I brought a sleeping pad and my sleeping bag and my backpacking pillow. And our fairy godmother of our van that I mentioned before had so lovingly given us all sleeping eye masks that had funny phrases on them. Some of them just said, shut up or let me sleep on them. And once I put that thing on, it was like the distant noise of the volunteers calling out numbers of approaching runners. And that just rocked me right to bed. And I slept, I think, maybe 3.5 hours. I woke up so refreshed, ready to go. And a couple of other people in my van had that exact same experience. We were like, whoa, that was amazing.
It is. It's just magical. We'll often bring a tarp, like a big tarp, instead of individual sleeping pads, and we just spread it out, and like half of our team can all kind of cuddle together on the tarp in our sleeping bags, and that works really well too.
So yeah, we got into a lot of the details, the nitty gritty of all of Hood to Coast, and if you aren't swayed already, how could you not be? Looking ahead to next year, 2025. Hood to Coast is happening August 22nd and 23rd, Friday and Saturday. Almost always it's Friday and Saturday.
Yep.
Just briefly getting into how one submits a team here. Yeah. What should we know about getting into the lottery process of Hood to Coast.
Yeah, and I have to say I've never been a team captain for Hood to Coast Oregon. I have been a team captain for the Washington Relay, which happens usually in June. It's half the distance. It's a 1 day instead of a 2 day. It's 100 miles. It's one team of 6 runners. If you can't get into the Oregon Hood to Coast, I highly recommend that one as like a first experience of running a relay. It's up in Seabrook, Washington, which is a really cute town on the Washington coast. Big fan. So I've captained a team for that. That one you just sign up for through the Hood to Coast website. For the Oregon Hood to Coast, which is the original, it's the most popular. You know, like I said at the top of the show, people come from all over the world. Companies sponsor teams. It is pretty difficult to get in as a team, a whole team that's never run it before. Once you run it once, you get priority in that lottery. So teams, fill out paperwork. In the past, you used to have to mail in a paper check. They changed that a couple years ago. You can actually pay by credit card online now. But the first few years that I ran it, like it was all, analog, offline. You had to mail everything in. And then they pick, X number of teams. It's changed over the years, and I can't remember off the top of my head exactly how many, but they pick from the teams in that lottery. They give people who've done it multiple times a little bit of priority. And they announce that in October, sometime in October, I believe. The best way to get into Hood to Coast, Oregon, is to put yourself out there as an alternate on a team. Once you run it once, then, that gives you that little bit of priority as somebody who's run it in the past. But yeah, I think that's the best way to do it. There are teams who run it every year. Somebody gets injured a lot of the time or ends up getting COVID and has to drop out at the last minute. Or, I've been on teams where, halfway through training, people found out that they were going to have a baby. Like, you can't run Hood to Coast when you're 8 months pregnant. I mean, there were probably some people who could. I would not have wanted to do that. So there's always that entry if you're willing to take a chance and run with people that you don't know. I actually think that's the best way to do it the first time and get involved. And then, kind of once you're in that community, it becomes easier to field your own team if that's what you want to do.
I think that is definitely the easiest route to go. And yeah, unless you're totally against the idea of being with a bunch of other strangers, but if there's any little inkling inside your head that's like, that could potentially be fun. From my experience, it was a great time. And you get to meet some new people, and it's all good. It's fun.
Yeah, it's great. The team that I've run with for the last few years, they were friends of friends, but they needed somebody because they had a runner drop out with injury, and I really didn't know anyone. It was similar to your experience, Vickie, where I knew one other person on the team, and they were delightful, and it was great, and I've run with them every year since, and I was really bummed that I didn't get to run with them this year.
Yeah. Ugh. So, Julie, are you planning for 2025 to participate in Hood to Coast?
Yes, if my same team is up for doing it again, and all the stars align, which they did not for me this year, I'm definitely in. I had a lot of envy of you getting to do it, especially getting to do it for the first time. And, I live out on the east side, a little bit closer to Mount Hood. So I saw all the vans going through, and I just had this, and I still didn't feel well. And I just had all of this heartbreak for not being able to be part of it. So I'm definitely in for next year. You sound pretty enthusiastic. So I'm going to guess what the answer to this question is, but are you planning to do it next year?
Absolutely. As soon as I was done, I don't know if it was the sleep deprivation, some delirium after running all those miles, but I was like, I have to do this again. And it's so funny looking back at what I was saying 2 years ago before I got into running. And even some of my close friends, my friends from soccer, are like, you hated running. What happened? I couldn't tell you. But whether I'm joining a team next year again as a single person, or if I organize some friends and hopefully by some luck we win the lottery to get in as a team, I'm fully planning on 2025. So just something to note, that lottery date is October 2nd of this year. So that's kind of why we're airing this episode. If you're trying to get a team together to submit for the lottery, that date is quickly approaching. Sells out on opening day, pretty much guaranteed. And yeah, keep that in mind if you're trying to submit for that lottery. Anything else we didn't talk about, Julie, that you want to mention?
Yes. We talked a little bit about how difficult it can be because this is such a popular relay. And I mentioned that Hood to Coast has a series of races elsewhere. The Washington one is probably the most comparable to the one that's the original one that's hosted in Oregon. But if you listen to this episode and it's too late to get your entry into that lottery, or, if you submit for the lottery and you don't get in, because that happens to a lot of people every year, there are other similar relay experiences around the Pacific Northwest. The Gorgeous Relay Series does relays out in the Columbia River Gorge. I believe there's one usually in September. The Cascade Lakes Relay happens in Central Oregon in June usually. And that's a very similar setup where you're with a van full of people and you run the legs like a relay. I have been invited to do that one. I've never done it. It's maybe a little bit more intense, I think, than Hood to Coast, but it's still a really fun experience. And then all over the country, there are Ragnar relays, which are more like off-road trail running relays. I have several friends who've done them. They say great things about them. I got a little intimidated looking at the website, looking at the pictures of, people running up the side of mountains, but I've heard nothing but good things. And if you go Googling around, there are others that are maybe like a little bit less intense than those, but I mentioned those because they have the most beautiful scenery. They're in these gorgeous locations. I tend to be a sightseeing runner. I like to pick races that I run based on like, what am I going to see? Where is it? Beautiful location. So all of those are great options if you happen to not get into next year's Hood to Coast.
Love that. All great options. Exploring the region, seeing all that the state has to offer, which is basically the crux of this podcast. So, well, I think that will do it for today. Until next time, you can watch our videos on the Oregonian's YouTube channel and view all of our travel and outdoors coverage on OregonLive.com/travel, as well as hereisoregon.com. Please leave us a rating or review if you enjoyed the show. And if you want to support this podcast, as well as our local journalism, please consider a subscription to Oregon Live. You can find details at OregonLive.com/pod support. Also, if you're a fan of the show and you're interested in potentially sponsoring it, you can get in touch with our marketing people at advertise@Oregonian.com. This episode of the show is produced by me, Vickie Connor, alongside Julie Evensen and Dave Killen. Stay safe and happy travels, everyone. Until next time, we leave you with this 10 seconds of Zen.